Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting another snow scene, another lovely winter tree scene with some silver birches, and I'm going to be using masking fluid again to mask out the trunks of the silver birch trees, just so that I can then paint a nice simple wash straight over them without having to worry about preserving the pale silver basic sort of birch trunk tones. I can then go in afterwards and put those in. So the first thing I'm going to do is roughly sketch out my plan for painting. My board's at 45 degrees. My paper is Milford cold pressed, a quarter imperial sheet. 11 inches by 15 inches or 28 centimetres by 38 centimetres. And I'm using my Kohinoor Versatile clutch pencil with a big 5.6mm lead to rough out a distant tree line and then simply put in my slender silver birches just as lines wherever I'm going to have one of the trunks. So I'm keeping it really, really simple. And then once I've drawn this out, I'll use my masking fluid just to mask out the trunks. So these lines are a good guide for me. Firstly, for applying the masking fluid, and secondly, to keep me on track when I paint. As I draw these lines in pencil, if I don't like them, I can easily erase them and redo them and until I get the composition that I like. Nothing's sort of set in stone at this point. It's if you decide to try to paint along with me, as you sketch out your guidelines for your trees, if you're not happy with any of the lines, then just erase them and draw in another few lines and twigs, but just bearing in mind that what we're trying to do is to create a harmonious painting which has a sort of rhythm to it, if you see what I mean. And the rhythm that I'm looking for here is that I want my branches to kind of be at sort of roughly somewhere around 45 degrees, stretching up from the middle of the page across towards the top of the page on the left side. Now this is my masking fluid. You can use any masking fluid for this, but please test your paper with your masking fluid first. Some of the cheaper papers don't like masking fluid, and when you try and remove it, it tears the paper, which of course will wreck everything. So test out the masking fluid on your paper first, and then also prepare your brush when you're using masking fluid. It's made of sort of a latex, and it will solidify and ruin your brush unless you are A, very quick, or B, wet the brush and rub it into some soap and rub some soap well into the hairs of the brush and then go into the masking fluid. That will protect the brush. Now here I'm taking a bit of time to apply my masking fluid in sort of scratchy stop-start lines, so that I get a nice sort of rough, loose look to my tree trunks. And because it's taking me a while, if I hadn't dipped the brush into soap first or rubbed soap into the hairs of the brush, then I would probably end up ruining the brush, because this is going to take quite a while to get the coverage that I want of masking fluid. So always try and remember to do that. Use an old brush just in case, but always rub some soap into it first, and then you should be fine. I'm quite happy with that. I'm now going to leave my masking fluid to dry, and I'll come back and then begin to paint. Okay, the masking fluid's dry, so with my large or extra large Pro Art Ranson Hake brush, I'm making up a sort of fairly neutral but coolish grey. Not too cool. I'm going to warm it up with a bit of burnt sienna. So that's indigo, paynes grey and a bit of burnt sienna. And now onto the dry page, I want to create a very pale, fairly even sky wash. You can see straight away how my masked out birch trees are already starting to show through quite nicely. So then just pulling a bit of that same colour across in a diagonal for the foreground, but leaving the midground unpainted white paper. Just want it nice and plain. I don't mind if it gets a little bit sort of patchy, because that area is mostly going to be covered by a tangle of the birch tree branches. And next, without adding any extra water to my Hake brush, I'm just going to dip the tips into almost tube consistency, very highly pigmented, quite dry Paynes grey. And you can see how I'm just using the tips of the brush to follow along the area that I'd shaded in with my pencil for distant trees, including a few of these sort of more sketchy lines with unpainted paper left between them. Because the sky is still wet, you can see that the tree line is beginning to sort of soften and diffuse in places as the water runs down into it because of gravity and my board being at 45 degrees. So I'm starting to get some quite nice, soft, distant effects, but a nice dark ridge of trees. And that's it for the first washes. I shall now leave it to dry completely, and as soon as it's completely dry, I'll come back and remove the masking fluid. So it's dried rather nicely. I'm quite happy with the way it looks. The next thing I'm going to do is with my finger, clean finger, is to rub off all of the masking fluid areas. You can use an eraser for this, or you can use the tacky side of a piece of masking tape. But I'm just going to rub it off with my fingers, just following the lines until I get it all removed. I won't show all of it because it'll take a little while to make sure it's all off. And here it is with all the masking fluid removed, and you can see that my branches stand out really nicely. So now I'm ready to begin to paint my trees. And for this, I'm going to use my small calligraphy brush, or rat liner as I think it's called. And first of all, I'm dipping it into clean water and running a brush load of water along my masked out area of my trees to make sure that the trunks are wet. And I'm going to do it one at a time because I'm going to take a little bit of time working wet into those thin trunks. This is Paynes grey with a bit of indigo, and you can see that I'm just touching it here and there and allowing gravity and the wet tree trunk to work its magic and just allow that paint to diffuse and soften along the trunk and almost sort of paint itself just by dotting and dabbing in slightly different consistencies of pigmented paint. Then I can go in with a tissue, I can knock back some areas and then go back in with darker paint here and there, maybe start to build up the distinctive sort of rings and dots of dark against the light that you always see with these beautiful silver birch trees. Trying to make sure that I preserve the light, particularly against where the trees pass over those dark background trees, because that should look really pretty and it should give us a good sense of depth and distance. Now I'm going to repeat it with all of these trees, but I won't show all of it on screen because it's all exactly the same process. Clean water like this throughout the length of the tree and then dotting in various mixtures of my Paynes grey and indigo, or any other colour that you choose to use, but those are the ones that I'm using for this. Knocking back with a tissue, softening and then adding more paint as you need to. And really that's how I'm going to go across all of these trees, and it's going to be fairly time consuming. So I will just cut straight to the last tree, and you can see how effective they look. Very, very simply done. As I say, it's using the wet in wet technique, but within the confines of each single tree trunk, which gives us this lovely effect. So using the same method, just fill in this last tree trunk from this little group, and then I can start painting the branches once that's dried. But while it's drying, I just want some grasses and twigs and things sticking out of the snow, running across the foreground from sort of just above the bottom left corner, just running up gently across at a shallow diagonal to give us a sense of perspective and the lay of the land. Using some nice inky consistency paint, and also some that's much drier where I can just dry brush and get that kind of hit and miss broken line, so that I've got some variety in my marks. And I think that will just about do. I'm now going to leave this all to dry completely so I don't smudge it, and I'll come back and get on with the branches. It's all nice and dry, so I'm going to continue to work on the birch trees by putting in the branches, these kind of diagonal tending branches mostly, using sort of stop-start lines to try and indicate the shape of the branches, overlapping some of them. I'm going to pull some of the tree branches behind some of these tree trunks so that I can sort of get the idea of this being, some of the trees being slightly further forward than others, or branches coming out and sticking out towards us or away from us. Again, I'm using this small calligraphy brush or rat liner, and inky consistency paynes grey with just a touch of indigo and a touch of sepia in it, just to give me this sort of like nice dark pigmented colour for the branches, because that really stands out well against the more distinctive silver birch trunks. Like with the trunks, I won't show all of this process because it takes quite a while to build up these effects. So, and it's all exactly the same. Just making sure that things aren't too samey, if you see what I mean, that it's not all coming out at the same sort of angles. There's some branches that are going to be coming back towards the right side rather than tending towards the left. Some will go further up, some will be at a sort of steep angle. And I'm bringing some in from trees that are outside of the frame, just bringing them across the tape so that they kind of encroach into the picture from, as I say, trees that you can't see in this picture plane. And then I'll bring some little twigs and sticks and bits of undergrowth from lower down those trunks and coming up from the base of the snow, just to add a little bit of variety, and then adding in a few more darks, putting in some of those sort of rings and dots and lines, again, that kind of suggests the distinctive bark of the silver birch. I'm going to be careful not to put too many branches at this lower level. I only want a few because I want the composition to be that most of the branches are across the top half of the painting and just a few across the bottom here and there. Trying to use the sort of less is more approach here. I could get carried away, but then I could overwork the painting. And I like to keep my painting sort of nice and fresh, and I would rather be too simple than too complicated, if you know what I mean. So I've decided that that's finished, and now I've removed the masking tape, and I think it looks really interesting. It looks the way I wanted it to. I'm very pleased with how the masking fluid helped me to preserve the white of the paper for my birch tree trunks, so that I was then able to go in and paint quite simply and easily using the wetting wet technique and then wet on dry to get that lovely texture and shadows for my slender birches. Well, I hope that was helpful to you and that you'll give this sort of thing a go. There are plenty of interesting photographs of similar scenes on royalty-free sites like Pixabay and Pexels. Thanks so much for watching. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to my wonderful Patreon group who support me and this channel. And I'll see you again soon. And happy painting. Bye.